Yar. Hi, Paulie here with my friend. So, this is just a little note for the Transgender History series. I've said it before and I'll say it again. As historians, we have to be extremely careful about how we interpret historical actors, that is, people whose actions in history and whose identities in history we study, placing our own interpretations onto them when they may not have conceived of themselves in that way, or when there is an ambiguity to how that person conceived of themselves. I want to talk about a pretty specific example. So, I've seen a lot of claims recently that a burial called the Red Lady of Paviland is transgender. I'm just going to stick my historian oar in the water here. I'm going to say it wasn't, and here's why. So here's the tale. In Wales, there is just a cave. It's colloquially called Goat Cave. In the 1830s, some locals fossicking around found some bones. They contacted it was actually the local curate, so he was a man of the cloth, but he was also the professor of geology at Oxford. He came to look at these. Now, the find was there's a mammoth skull, but then buried, framed by the mammoth skull and its tusks, was a human burial. He somehow decided this was an elephant tusk, an elephant skull, and the body he found, it was human skeleton, rubbed in red ochre and covered in a dusting of red ochre. They had, in the chest cavity area and so on, there were many, many seashells, which were probably a seashell necklace where the thread that held it together had just, not survived the years. And also some fine ivory tubes, which also may have been like a belt or a collar or a necklace of some sort. Given that decor, the curate decided that this was clearly a woman, and because it was covered with red ochre, the Red Lady of Paviland, the town, for some reason he decided this was obviously the burial of a Roman prostitute, because so he shoved the bones in a box and he just shipped them off to Oxford, where they stayed for, about 170 years. Now, more recently, with radiocarbon dating and so on, this turns out to be an incredibly significant burial. This is the oldest human burial that we have. It is 33,000 years old. It comes during a period of ice age, glaciation, and this is it. This is the oldest human burial we have, as opposed to non-human groups like Neanderthals and so on. No, Homo sapiens sapiens. Further analysis of the bones has shown that they are genetically male. This was the bones of someone who was born a young man. Born a young man. Of course, they're born a young man. They were born a man, and they were young. They were about 21 years old at time of death. We don't know how they died. The bones tell us no real tale of that. In a period where your life expectancy could be nasty, brutish, and short, 21's probably doing pretty well, to be honest. Now, here's the thing. There are people claiming that this is a transgender burial because it was a man buried with his decorative items. The thing that they keep going back to is the same thing that the 1830s minister came back to time and time again. If it was a man, why wasn't it buried with weapons and tools? Well, we don't know the burial customs of this people. Tools at this period can conceivably be seen as more of a communal resource than an individual resource, and groups may have been reluctant to take them out of community circulation, whereas someone's ornaments are their own and a very personal thing. So, there's our mine. It disappeared under here. But, so this person was buried with their most precious ornaments, but not tools. That doesn't necessarily say. There were no scrapers, no awls, no needles, no hand axes, no stone tools or flakes of any kind surviving in the archaeology, which, given the fact that stone survives really well in archaeology, means that they weren't there. But their lack does not peg that person, pun intended, as being a transgender woman. Some people also claimed, red ochre signifies that that was a woman. That would be a lovely diagnostic if it was even in the slightest bit true. Red ochre burials are quite common in prehistoric burials of this type. They have been commonly found both in male and female graves. So the ochre is not a diagnostic of the sex or gender of the person in that grave. There is no hard evidence, one way or another, of how this person conceived themselves and what their role in their community was. Let us be careful. The right wing bases its ideologies entirely upon lies, myth and fantasy. They ignore science if it suits their narrative. Let us never, never fall into that error. Let's build our stories on truth, because we've all sought out our truth and we found it, we live it. The Red Lady, still charmingly that burial's name, we can't claim it as a transgender burial. There's no evidence that that's how this person conceived of themselves and that's how they lived. We don't know, and in the light of not knowing, just don't say it. But what we do have here is a stunning moment. 33,000 years ago, a community buried a young person, and they buried them with great ceremony and a great deal of love. It looks like the body was probably either buried or possibly exposed until there was nothing but bones left. Then the bones are completely painted in red ochre, emplaced, framed within this cave and with mammoth bones. More red ochre is put over them. They're buried with their most precious ornaments. This is a moment of sadness that it's been brought from history and preserved for us. But it's an incredibly human moment. It's a moment of respect and love and community preserved across 33,000 years. 33,000 years ago we were treating our own with love and grief and respect. Those people were as human as we are. As human as we are. And that's what we should celebrate in the Red Lady. Not inventing little tales. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents worth. And again, that word of caution that we have to be careful not to fall into the errors of those who complain against us. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to my little historian rant, and we shall keep going. More games reviews and more history later on. Cheers, everyone.